Hey everyone, just wanted to share some exciting news about what's coming soon. In the next few weeks, you're going to see our show, currently called Ask Ralph, getting a fresh new look and a name that I believe really speaks to what we're all about. We're going to be transitioning to Financially Confident Christian. And don't worry, it's still me, Ralph, and we'll still be bringing you that same practical, faith-based financial guidance every day to help you tackle debt, to help you build savings and grow your business and truly break free from the financial shame with confidence. And alongside the new name, you'll also see some brand new artwork, so keep an eye out for that. I am really excited about this next step and how Financially Confident Christian better reflects our mission together. I'll have more details coming soon. This past week on Ask Ralph, we explored 6 small but powerful daily steps that can shift your finances, stretch your resources, and strengthen your faith. Today, we're hitting pause on the daily grind to zoom out a little bit. We're unpacking the biblical foundation behind each of those steps. We're answering some amazing listener questions and sharing even more real-world strategies to help you break that cycle of financial stress and do it with confidence. So whether you're packing your lunch for the week or sitting in traffic, this episode is for your invitation to dig deeper, laugh a little bit, and grow in confidence as a faithful steward of all God has given you. Let's get to it, but first, here's a sneak preview of my new show, Grit and Growth Business. Ralph, setbacks keep knocking me down. How do I get back up? Well, let me tell you something right now. It's okay to feel knocked down. I've been kicked in the teeth. I've been punched in the throat. It's all part of life. It's all part of being in business. Allow yourself that moment. Then ask yourself this very difficult question. What's the lesson here? What's the lesson here for me? Because listen to me, every setback has feedback hidden inside of it. People miss this. You got to analyze it. You got to learn from it, then get back up and get back up smarter and get back up stronger than you ever were before. Building something real, something yours. This is hard work. Success isn't guaranteed. It's just not. It's earned through that relentless grit. But I see you. I see that resilience. I see that refusal to quit. Well, hello and welcome to this special edition of Ask Ralph. I'm your host, Ralph, and I'm so glad you carved out some extra time to join me today. And as usual, my good friend Craig is joining me again today. Welcome, Craig.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, my friend. I mentioned to Craig as we were getting ready, we're getting some rain here in Delaware today, so I've got the rain clouds here behind me. But for this past week, we really have been digging deep into our joy of living below your means, and we dove into what I consider 6 very practical daily action steps, all designed to help you gain control, to save money, and really to practice good stewardship. And ultimately, in the end, the goal was to find more freedom and faith in our financial lives. And we asked some really great questions last week. We started off the week with, is buying lunch draining your wallet? Then we moved into, are unused subscriptions draining your budget? A lot of draining going on there. Then we said, want to stop impulse buys? Try this rule. We moved into need weekend fun that doesn't break the bank. We talked about how you could save money by shopping your house first, and then we rounded out the week with, can you intentionally lower one utility bill this month? So today we're going to step back from that daily rhythm and take a little longer look, a little bit higher view of these 6 topics. We're going to talk about some of the core ideas we talked about this week. We're going to explore the biblical principles behind them more deeply. And I'm going to share some extra tips, and Craig's going to throw in some as well. And more importantly, we're going to address some fantastic questions from listeners that sent in about these real-world struggles and the successes of putting these practices into action. So find a comfortable spot, maybe reflect on how your own week went with these actions, and let's dig a little deeper together. Again, our main goal today is to reinforce these habits, troubleshoot some common challenges, and anchor our practical steps firmly in our faith. So let's get started. And we started off, like I said, with this question: is buying lunch draining your wallet? And the core idea here was recognizing the massive cumulative cost of habitually buying lunch out. Thousands of dollars a year when you really look at it. And the primary challenge we identified wasn't just the cost, that was part of it, but the hurdles of convenience, the lack of time or energy, and maybe even workplace culture. And our solution was pretty straightforward, and I was very bold about this. I said, commit to packing lunch from home. We talked about keeping it simple, leftovers from the fridge, and batch prepping components on the weekend, simple sandwiches and soups, and When we looked at it, the benefits were undeniable. There were significant savings. We saw healthier meals, more control, and even saving time during the actual lunch break. And the faith connection here was really strong. It was all about stewardship of our money, yes, but also stewardship of health and time. And we came away with it needing to be a disciplined planning, mirroring biblical principles like the ant preparing in Proverbs 6, or Jesus ensuring that the leftovers weren't wasted, and that's in John 6. And it's all about that intentional living versus costly convenience. And this resonated with Brenda, who actually sent us in our first question this week, Craig. And I'll go ahead and now Brenda's coming to us from Georgia. And you'll notice I changed a slide around here. We're making it look a little different, Craig. So we're going to move forward here. So this is what Brenda had to say. Excuse me, Martha. What am I saying? Martha. Martha said, "Hi, Ralph. I started packing my lunch this week inspired by this show. And I did save money, but I got bored really fast eating the same sandwich or leftovers. How do you keep packed lunches interesting so you don't give up and go back to buying?" Now, Martha, I got it right that time. This is an excellent follow-up question because boredom is definitely a major reason why people abandon that packed lunch habit. Again, consistency is a key, but variety keeps it sustainable and enjoyable. Now, Craig, what are your thoughts on that? I know last week you mentioned that you're a yogurt and blueberry fan, if I remember correct, or granola, I think
That's
it
right.
was.
That's right. Granola, yogurt, and blueberries, and that's what I had for lunch today. I don't get bored eating the same thing over and over again. I don't know whether it's kind of the way we grew up or what it was, but it doesn't bother me. I wonder if maybe it wouldn't be worthwhile for Martha to think about, this is going to sound weird, but why is she eating? You've heard the term eat to live, don't live to eat. And so, maybe just find a couple of things that you really do like and that are good enough and cycle through. But that being said, I think we can take all of this too far and maybe once a week go out to lunch or, you know, make something a little fancy, whatever it might be. So I don't know, Ralph, what do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think you got to move beyond the sandwiches. I mean, it can get really boring if every day you're just making a sandwich, two pieces of bread with some kind of meat slap between them. One of the things that I came up with, which I thought was a great idea when I did some research for this show, was what they called mason jar salads. And I thought this was really kind of cool because you start off, you put the dressing on the bottom, then you put the hearty stuff and then the greens on top so they stay fresh. I thought that was really a kind of a cool idea. It's something you can make up real easy, kind of grab out the door. It's pretty portable. We also talked about something called grain bowls. So you start with a base like quinoa, I think is the right term, or brown rice, and then you add a protein like chicken or beans or, now look, I'm not into tofu, but it recommended tofu here. I'm not into that whole tofu thing. But then you can put some roasted vegetables, greens, and simple dressing. We also talked about wraps. I remember too, Craig, I mentioned this in this show the other day, and I remember when I was a kid, like we had thermoses. We would have that thermos and we'd put soup in it or chili or even some pasta dishes. Did you ever do that, Craig? It seems like I don't really see those anymore, those old thermoses.
I can still remember the horror of dropping my thermos and then hearing the rattle when the glass that was the insulator back then broke. Yeah, we do soup or, that kind of thing in thermoses. I think a lot of people that work kind of out on job sites still do this. Have a big giant thermos. So
That was a flashback. I'd forgotten about those glass-lined thermoses, man. That's
yeah.
a real flashback. I remember my grandfather having one, and it was like, I know what you're talking about. That sound of that
It's
was
like,
not a
oh
good
no,
sound.
no, that's not a good sound at all. Um, you do have to balance convenience and um, the cost and the health and that sort of thing. Ralph, this is a great use for AI. Matter of
Oh,
fact,
that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, Craig.
when I when I teach AI to my grads, one of the first things that I have them do is come up with a meal plan, and it's a great thing. You give it your preferences. It might give you 20 ideas and 15 of them stink, but then you've got five good ideas, and the whole thing will take just a couple of minutes. And any AI should be able to do that pretty
That's
effectively.
that's a really great idea. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I,
Well,
I
that's
guess
why.
at some point with the AI, you could even feed into it, like if you had food allergies or things that you
Oh yeah.
just don't like, you could say, listen, give me some really great ideas. Like for me, I don't like olives, so no
What
olives.
What is wrong? That's my wife is like that. You both seem so normal otherwise.
So I'll throw one at you. You love this one, Craig. I don't like raw tomatoes, but I'll eat salsa and ketchup. My wife is like, there's something wrong with you for sure. Like, I just don't like raw tomatoes. I know it's silly, but as
Even
we're talking
homegrown,
about food,
even homegrown.
yeah, it's funny because my grandfather used to grow these things called supersonic tomatoes. And I'm going to tell you, they look like pumpkins. These things were massive. And he was one of these old Southern fellas, and he'd go out in the garden. He always had the big garden plants, and he'd pull what they called the suckers off of them, and it would make these huge tomatoes. Well, he'd go out there, and he had this little mason jar about 3 inches long, 3 inches tall, with full of salt. And he'd go out there and he'd take one of those tomatoes off, kind of rub it on his shirt, and he'd be pouring that right on there, and he just loved it. And it was funny because I remember he got a little bit sick when he got a little bit older and he was in the hospital, and they took his salt away from him. Well, that didn't last long because he had us bring in his mason jar of salt, and he just kept it hidden underneath. But anyway, getting back to the topic, one of the things, the other things you can do, I mentioned in the show, is rotate your proteins. Not just turkey sandwiches. You can do chicken salad, tuna salad, Greek yogurt, maybe with a healthy twist, hard-boiled eggs. Hummus, another one that I don't like, but I put it on the list. Veggies. I'm making everybody upset now. I see Craig's just shaking his head going, what is wrong with this man? Leftover shredded pork or beef, and you can eat vegetables and fruits. But the thing is, I think the big takeaway for me is this. Understand why you're doing it. Is it because you want to focus on saving money? Because what this interesting things is, and I deal with a lot of small business clients, and it always kind of cracks me up, Craig. They'll come in and, let's say they're doing a job for me or something, and like every day they're going out and grabbing lunch. And then they come in for some financial counseling at the end of the month, and they're like, Rob, I just can't understand how I'm not making any money. And I'll say to them, well, you're spending $200 a week on eating out from lunch. And how many hours away from your job site are you taking? So it's interesting. Like, we have some, and this is going to sound really kind of harsh, but like, I have some clients that are Amish and some clients that are Mennonite. And these guys, man, that's very cool when they come to work because they bring like the picnic with them. And I'm telling you, and the food looks outstanding. And now sometimes we say, hey, Ralph, come over here and try this. And as long as it's not tomatoes, I'm good. But man, they make an event of it.
For the record, our friend Mark agrees with me that there is something wrong with you.
Well,
Tomatoes.
I'm
Just,
sure
yeah,
I'm
I'm
not
just making you aware, making sure you keep an eye on the chat.
I'm sure he's not the only one. But like you said, too, I think you got to allow yourself that treat. Maybe it's once a week or once every 2 weeks. But the whole point is you don't want to build this restriction, but you also have to look at it from a way of, really focusing in on planning your meals, and you can plan this with creativity.
And I want to throw one other thing out there real quickly. So a lot of times in a workday, lunch is not just lunch. It's a break, and it may be a little bit of a social time. But you can disconnect the food that you're eating from that. If maybe you're eating at your desk, well, maybe you don't work, you read a book or do something else. So I think sometimes we feel like we've got to go out to lunch and pay for lunch to get away from the office and get that break. But you can go sit outside. A lot of workplaces have a break room. There are a lot of things you can do that don't involve going out and paying. Lunch prices, restaurant prices are just insane right now. And you know why their food tastes so good? They often are loaded up on the fats and the salt.
Well,
And
that's the good point, Craig. And that's the other side of this. It's not just the money-saving side of this. It's the health-saving side of this. And I don't know about you, but if I eat a huge lunch, man, I'm just dragging the rest of the afternoon. And by 3 o'clock, I'm taking a nap on the floor. My employees are coming like, what's Ralph doing? He's sleeping in here. But it's true, though. It kind of weighs you down. So I love your idea. Go read a book. Go take a walk. I remember I used to work for a law firm, and some of the accountants had worked for me. That's what we did every day at lunch. We'd have a quick sandwich, and then we go out and walk along. In Wilmington, it's called the Brandywine River. And we just take a walk down what they called, I think it was called the old mill trace, where they would have the mill, the line. And it was just something to do to get outside, get a little vitamin D, I guess it is, from the sunlight. But I think it's just a place to use your creativity for sure.
Right.
Well, then the next thing we talked about was this question: are unused subscriptions draining your budget? We talked about something I call subscription creep, that accumulation of small automatic monthly charges that drain our accounts, and they do it kind of passively. The struggle here is often inertia and lack of awareness. We sign up for something, we forget about it, but we just keep paying. And my big solution for that was comb through all your statements, list all those recurring charges, evaluate their actual use and value, and then decisively cancel at least one unused service. And I think we're all guilty of this. And this is all about reclaiming control over automatic spending. And again, the faith angle here was all about awareness and intentionality. We talk about this on the show all the time, Craig, is that intentionality. Are we mindfully allocating resources, or are we just letting them, leak away? It also touches on what I called pruning. Are these subscriptions adding value? Are they bringing forth fruit? Are they proportionate to their cost? Or are they just digital clutter we're paying for? And it might involve questioning if certain media subscriptions align with our values or consume too much of our time. And we got a question here. This one comes to us from Calvin. So let me switch over here to Calvin's question. Calvin's from not far from here in Pennsylvania. He sent in this question. He said, Ralph, I did the subscription review, and besides the obvious ones, I found I'm paying for several software or app subscriptions related to my small business, or what he calls side hustle, that I thought I needed but barely use. Is it okay to cut business-related subscriptions too, or should I keep them just in case? Well, Calvin, that is a fantastic point and very relevant to my small business clients, owners, and entrepreneurs listening. You got to distinguish between essential business tools and what I call nice-to-haves, or maybe what some people call them aspirational subscriptions, because it's all about that stewardship, but it's also stewardship of your business finances too. Craig, it looks like you've got a thought here.
Yeah, I think you need to be a little bit careful here. As one of our mutual friends likes to say, you either pay in time or money. So this is one of those where absolutely necessary may not be the right bar. We really ought to have more of a return on investment bar. So if there's something that costs you $50 a month, but it saves you 2 hours a month, even if you only use it every other month, you're still probably at a positive return on investment. And sometimes that's not easy to figure out, but I also have a secret
Here we
that
go.
they don't want you to know. You can resubscribe. So if you drop a subscription and find, I really did need that thing, they will take your money once again. There may be some rare exceptions where it's a special deal, but 90+% of the time, you put your credit card number in, they'll be very happy to have you. They may even give you a discount for coming back.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I've done that with Sirius XM radio. At times I'll say, I just don't use the thing, and you got to ask yourself a real simple question. Are you actively using that tool right now? Because like you said, it might be something that gave you value in the past and it might give you value in the future. But if you're not using it right now, you don't just do what we call just in case or maybe someday. I think the big things you want to do here is just track your usage. Are you actually using it? Consciously write down, do you use this software? Are you going to use this app in the next month? And then I think that's sort of your takeaway. It's not the things that, like you said, Craig, I think it's vital what you said. If it's saving you time, hey, that's not a subscription you want to cut. But you can also look for cheaper or free alternatives. There's a lot of times there's a free version or what they call the low tier plan that give you a less expensive option. And maybe that could accomplish 80% of what you actually need from it. Or, sometimes we pay for premium features that we never even use. Well, we got to buy that premium. A lot of times, and I think this is kind of sinister, but I get it. We're in a capitalist society. They'll sell you the premium thing, right? With the idea that after 30 days, if you don't contact them, you just lock into that thing. And I know myself, like I've had a couple of them that really kind of annoys me actually, is I'll get an alert say, we just renewed you for another year. I'm like, I didn't use that last year. What is wrong with me? Why didn't I go do it? And then ask yourself, can you do this manually? Like you said, you got to do that judging of, is it saving you time? Is it saving you money? But really take a look and are you using it or not?
I've got a little tip for that annual thing because, they're very clever the way they price these things. If they were $100 a month, we would pay a lot more attention, but they're $10 a month or $15 a month or 20 a month or whatever. If you get hit with one of those where it automatically renewed for the next year, right then, as soon as you get that email, go into your calendar and back off a week from today's date next year and put a big thing that says cancel. So I kept getting caught up with Adobe.
Oh, yeah.
Really good deal for a while, and I was using it more. wasn't using it enough, and it's not cheap. So, the big thing, cancel Adobe. And that will really help because you get irritated and then you go on to something else and you forget. And, next year you will have your second anniversary of irritation. So use that calendar. It's really, really important.
That's a great idea. And I notice a lot of them now, because I've actually been more intentional about this, is you can actually go out there and cancel the subscription from auto renewing. And then you still have the benefit of the service through the year. But that's a very good point. One of the things I mentioned in the show is be aware of what I called aspirational subscriptions. Because sometimes we subscribe to tools hoping that we're going to use them to make ourselves more productive, but we never use them. I probably have some that I've paid for, especially some annual ones. So you got to really understand that and consider that tool. I mentioned annual versus monthly. If you do use a tool consistently, sometimes you can save money by paying for it annually. That's not a terrible thing to do. Just take a look and say, am I really going to use this? The problem is a lot of times you might kick the tires on this for 30, 60, 90 days, and then you're like, yeah, it works, but it doesn't really do what I want it to do. And then if you've paid for that annual, you're kind of stuck. But, I think you got to play it out for the first 30 days, in my opinion. And another thing, Calvin asked in the question, I think this all ties into your business budget. Look at your business budget, and do you have a line item that talks about, these recurring subscriptions and software subscriptions? I know, Craig, I'm guilty about this on the AI front. I think I've got Poe now. I've got Gemini. I've got Chat GPT that I'm paying for their premium service. I love the services. Don't get me wrong, but it's you know what? It's really kind of annoying when I look at how many I'm paying for. And could I do the same thing? For example, I was listening to your AI Goes to College show this morning while I was getting ready. And I know you and your partner there that do that with you. You guys were talking about that. Well, I've got use this one. I've got this one. And the interesting thing is, each of them do something a little bit different. But I think we have to step back as a business. And I'm saying not from the standpoint of does this AI tool work, but step back as a business and say, well, is this good enough? Is this good enough for what I do?
Absolutely. And the way the AI tools have evolved, you can probably get by with one of the big tools and not have to have multiple. This one will be a little bit better at this thing than that one is, but they're all kind of, as you said, good enough. I have one more little tip before we move on. If you cancel a subscription, make sure that you do something to export your data, because the big risk here is that you lose access to your data. And so there are universal formats like comma separated values, or it might be PDF, it might be Markdown, whatever text, whatever it is. But if it's something that you've been building up data in, make sure that you export it.
No, I absolutely agree with that. A lot of people don't think about that, for sure.
No.
That's a really valid point. And then there's also the question, and I don't know if this is your area of expertise or not, Craig, but the question is, do you want to scrub your data from it? Is there data out there? And I don't really know the answer to the question. I know on your show this morning, you were talking to a guy that does sort of IT security. That might be something to cover on your show. I mean, if it doesn't really fit into what you do, but if you've got all these tools and they're collecting data, is there a way to scrub that data?
Sometimes there isn't. But if there is, once you're sure you're not going to go back to that tool, you really ought to scrub it.
Or at least make a call and ask them, is there a way to delete my data?
Right. Yeah.
If you think about it, at some point in our lives, right, we're going to all recognize that there are all these servers out there with little smidgens of data on each of us. And it's going to be somebody is going to get the bright idea one of these days, I can go and do a lot of identity theft fraud by grabbing all the, anyway, let's not.
No, that's a whole thing. In fact, my doctoral seminar on Thursday, we're talking about digital surveillance.
Yeah, that's no joke.
It's exactly that. No, it's not a joke. It really is serious.
Well, let's move on to our Wednesday show. Wednesday, we talked about if you want to stop impulse buys, try this rule. And we focused on the common frustration of buyer's remorse after making unplanned, often emotional-driven purchases or wants. And this is something we kind of talk about all the time, Craig. So I talked about a powerful solution, that 24-hour rule, or for some people, it's the 48-hour rule. And that's where you really institute a mandatory waiting period for those non-essential purchases, not clothing, not water, not things that you have to have, And you set a personal threshold for that, and it creates a space between that desire and the action. We discussed how this pause allows emotions to cool, rational thought to happen again. You could pray about it, and then you can look at your budget and say, does this make sense? It builds that spiritual muscle of patience, self-control, and resisting that immediate gratification. And it helps us discern true needs and valuable ones from just fleeting desires. We all have those. Aligning our spending more closely with wisdom and our financial plan. And we got this question from Angela. Angela from Michigan reached out with this question. She said, "Hi, Ralph. The 24-hour rule makes sense for bigger want purchases, but what about all the little impulse buys, like adding a candy bar at checkout, grabbing a magazine or small $5 to $10 things online? They don't hit my threshold, but they add up. Does the rule apply here?" I thought this was a great question, Craig, because she's absolutely right. Those small, seemingly insignificant impulse buys can absolutely torpedo your budget just because of volume. It's kind of like that, what they say, death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that 24-hour, formal rule is typically for items over a set threshold to avoid that decision fatigue on every little tiny purchase. But the principle behind it definitely applies to smaller items too. Craig, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, so a couple of things. First, the threshold is up to Angela. So Tracy and I have tried to get in the habit of leaving even little small things in the shopping cart for 24 to 48 hours because, you're right, they add up. We also don't need so much crap. We have a big house. And it's just
I'm going to
full of
quote you on that.
stuff.
No, hold on a second. We don't need so much crap. I like that, dude.
Yes, that's it.
My wife would support that 100%. She would say, "Ralph, why do you need all this crap?" So, Craig, that is the theme of the show today. We don't need all this crap.
You don't need it, but you do need homegrown tomatoes. So I'm not putting homegrown
See,
tomatoes
there
in
we
that
go. There
crap
we go,
category.
man.
Quite the opposite. But just extend your threshold downward. The other thing is, I think we can modify that 24-hour rule. We've talked about this on the show too, with those candy bars at the checkout aisle. Just take your phone out, wait for a minute. And if you still want it, maybe you need it. But I think sometimes if you just wait, give yourself that little bit of space to make a non, what we would call in the academic world, a habitual decision, you actually stop and make a rational decision. A lot of times you'll just leave it there. Another little trick, I haven't tried yet, but I'm going to try to practice not buying things, which sounds a little weird, but I want to see if I don't buy something, am I going to remember not buying it the next day?
Intentionally not buying.
Right.
I think
Right.
that's
Just,
brilliant. I think that's
I'm going to
brilliant.
not buy this thing.
I'm going to
And
challenge you to go even deeper. Think about this. Keep track of how much the non-bought items were. And then at
yeah.
the end of the week or month say, "Oh, I saved this much because of the non-boughts."
But I think I want to go back to the crap thing, just because there's a reason I brought that up. Even if you can afford all these little things, you still really do junk up your house with a bunch of unnecessary things. It's not great for the environment. There are a lot of things about all this stuff that we buy. And I think we can kind of back off of the consumerism a little bit. I'm not trying to criticize capitalism or anything like that, but all that stuff that you buy on the impulse, it's put there by merchandisers to try to manipulate you. And I don't know about y'all, but I do not like being manipulated. And so I think we can fight back a little bit by trying to not buy things. So
I think you're right.
As soon as I said, I spoke too soon. As soon as I said crap, our number of viewers went up, but it just dropped back down. So I ragged on capitalism, and there goes. So.
No, but I think what you're alluding to is awareness, dude. That's what we're really talking about. Because it's awareness. It's noticing how these small impulse buys. Now, listen, I got around the candy bar thing since I started wearing one of these glucose meters. I got one of these things you inject in your body like every 10 days. And I look down at my watch and I'm like, oh, my sugar's good. But I know if I eat that Snickers bar, that number is going up. So it's just a way, like you said, it's a look away. It's an intentional decision. But I think just keeping track of that, having awareness is the key. Because, and the other thing, and you mentioned this last week, I think, Craig, And as maybe you need to have a blow money budget. And like, this
Yeah.
is my blow money. I'm going to set it away, set it $10, $20, whatever. Pick a number. Maybe you take your lunch out of that money. You take I'm going to go buy this little fun thing I wanted, but set that into your budget. Because, that way you can be intentional about, yeah, this is my fun money. This is I'm going to spend it however I want money.
And that's a lot of nutritionalists say if you're trying to lose weight, you should have a cheat day, because being constantly rigorously disciplined can be wearing over time. And so, having a little bit of blow money. By the
Oh,
way, we don't mean cocaine there. I just
yeah,
want to
we're
be really
being very
careful.
careful here. We're not talking about. I'm picturing when I was
Discretionary money. Yeah.
Craig. I'm picturing like the old Miami Vice scene. Like I don't know, when I was a kid. Now, see, I'm really dating myself, but Friday nights Miami Vice was on. And anyway, but oh yeah, but you know what? The cheat day is great because I actually do that on my diet now. So when we go out to eat on like Sunday nights, I'll get the onion rings and I'll get something that's like, you know what? I really don't eat that on a daily basis, but you have to do that. But at the same time, one of the things that Angela mentioned here is at the grocery store. Well, one of the things I talked about a couple of weeks ago was on that list only rule. Follow that grocery list only. Make sure that you're only doing what's on there. Another thing I think you got to look at here is your triggers, because I think, Craig, a lot of times these little impulse buys are really a function of triggers, that stress, that boredom, that hunger while you're shopping. Like one of the things that I heard somebody say now, it's probably been a while ago now, but they would say, don't ever grocery shop hungry. And I've tried that a few times, and that is true. That is not a good thing to do. So, that's a problem. Or maybe there's certain stores. You're like, I just don't go into that store because it triggers this or it triggers that. But you got to address those triggers. Another thing that I recommended in that show that day was keep a healthy snack in your bag. I think that's a really good way to do it.
Mark would agree with you. Mark Lawley, practicalpreppers.info, he and Krista are really big on having emergency snacks in your vehicle. So it's just an extension of that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And then ask yourself the next logical question. Do I really need this, or is this a want? And just take that into, I like what you said, like almost have a thing on your phone, like I'm going to do a 1-minute countdown before I put this onto the conveyor belt, or before I start doing, and like you talked about, calculate that cumulative cost and look at those $5 here and $5 there. We were beating up on Starbucks a couple of weeks ago, $7, $10 a day. Well, in a week, that's a lot of money, and ask yourself, does that money align with your bigger goals? So Angela, getting back to your question, while you might not apply that strict 24-hour wait for a candy bar rule, I think you should apply the principles. Like we talked about, that not cocaine blow money, planning the grocery list, and a quick mental pause before grabbing those small, frequent impulse buys. They definitely add up. So, Angela, again, thank you so much for sharing that question. I thought that was really good. Now,
Ralph, I've got a quick pro tip.
Sure,
If you find yourself where you need to shop when you're feeling hungry, a big old cup, or even if you have to buy it, a bottle of water will give you that full feeling for just long enough to get through the grocery store.
It's absolutely true. I talked to a nutritionist one time, Craig, and they said most of the time the issue is not that we're hungry. It's that we are habitually, dehydrated. Mm-hmm. And they said a lot of times it's not that you're hungry. You just need something in your body. And you're right. And I've even noticed myself is when I feel like I've got that hunger, I'll go drink an 8-ounce glass of water. And then usually, now it may not always break the habit, but at least it's a stop. Like, okay, this might solve the problem. Yeah. But now Thursday we moved into the weekend. We talked about need weekend fun that doesn't break the bank. One of the things that a lot of people ask me about, there's like, I like to do stuff on the weekend, but it costs so much money. And we addressed the difficulty many face assuming that fun, relaxation, and connection requires spending money, which leads to budget strain or feeling deprived. And I came up with what I called the joyful solution, Craig. And that's intentionally planned free or nearly free entertainment. We leveraged, brainstormed ideas about nature and, like you talked about, going for a walk and using libraries, community events, simple home-based activities like game nights or potluck dinners with friends, and focusing on relational time over those purchased experiences. Now, again, the faith connection here was pretty strong. And that was finding joy in God's creation and those simple blessings, valuing fellowship, valuing those relationships over consumerism, and being good stewards of leisure time. It's all about realizing that the best things in life truly can be free. And we heard from Robert on this one. Let's see what Robert says to us. And Robert comes to us from Washington State. Robert said, Ralph, I love the free ideas like hiking in parks, but I live in an area where the weather is often rainy or cold, especially for long stretches. It feels harder to find consistently free non-outdoor activities, especially with kids. Any suggestions? And I said, Robert, that's just the truth, right, Craig? There might be certain places where that just you can't do it. And that's why I don't think you can rely solely on outdoor activities, because it's not just feasible. And we need to have some free indoor options as well. Craig, you might relate to that where you live in the heat of the summer. I wonder if you kind of feel the same way about outdoor stuff.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for outdoor activities and you're anywhere near Eris, Louisiana, I will for free let you ride around on my zero turn mower. I won't charge you a nickel. Um, no, libraries. I mean, you mentioned this, but libraries are awesome. They're heated, they're air conditioned. They love having kids in. I know the old days of the stern librarian always telling you to shush.
Yeah,
That's
shh.
kind of not that's not the vibe anymore. This is going to sound so random, but when I was reading his question, I thought, well, make some blanket forts. Remember how much fun blanket forts
Oh
were
yeah.
when you
Actually,
were a
I
kid?
have that in my notes here to talk about. I remember as a kid, dude. Okay, I'm gonna share something really funny now, right? So when my two boys were young, we used to have a tent in the rec room, right? Now my wife thought I was playing with the kids, but to be honest with you, I was slumbering in that tent. But the
Yeah.
kids thought it was great. Like, Dad is over here in the tent with us. Little bit, then every once in a while my wife would walk by and he's snoring in there. But we had loved it. It was fun. And like you said, we used to make what they call those forts. We would take chairs and prop them
Yeah.
up with the blanket over top. It was so much fun.
Yeah. And I think that sort of thing, going back to, God, we're going to sound old here, but going back to the days when you didn't have so many pre-planned, highly structured activities could be another thing. Just having fun, running around being kids. My neighbors are brilliant at entertaining their kids. They've got a son and a daughter. The wife can find more things to make arts and crafts out of. You know, crayons in Amazon boxes or old printer paper or whatever, and they love it. The kids love it. They have a lot of fun. It's family time. They'll work on something separately. They'll work on something together. So that kind of thing even is really pretty good. So you don't have to overthink reading a book together.
I agree with you. And just go visit friends and family. Like I feel like these kids growing up today, and boy, I sounded old when I just said that. But I
You
feel like
rotten
these kids
kids.
growing up today, they're on their phones and their screens all the time. Go visit your grandmother. She'd probably love to see you if she's still around. Or go visit that aunt or uncle you haven't seen in forever. We just don't value that as a society anymore. I feel like everybody's so disconnected. It's funny, Craig. We're connected in more ways than we've ever been technologically, but in my humble view, we are more disconnected than we've ever been.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's true. I'm going to be even more old man. Your kids and you can stand a little bit of cold weather and rainy weather. Um, I if you dress right and you're not out there too terribly long, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Run around. I know. I'm sure where you grew up, you played in the snow. Snow fort, snowball fights, and all that kind of thing, and you seem to have survived.
Craig, I remember when I was a kid, I had this flashback the other day. We used to have the outdoor like winter boots, right? And I remember we always saved the Wonder bread wrappers. And this is a flashback I had the other day. And when you brought that, it just brought me up. And my mom would wrap our feet in Wonder bread bags. And then I don't remember, did we use rubber bands or something? Probably the doctors will freak out when I say this. But you just bundled up. I don't know. Have we gotten weak? Like, have we gotten soft? Seriously, have we gotten soft? Because it's okay to get a little frostbite here and there. It's not going to hurt you.
No, I mean, you can go overboard with anything, but I think maybe we've gone overboard and trying to avoid some of those sorts of things. But you know what? I don't have kids, so what do I know?
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, you can learn something together for free. You can go learn a new habit. I mean, Robert, bad weather doesn't have to mean spending money or being bored. Just get creative. And like Craig said, go to the library. I haven't been to a library forever, Craig. But there's home-based fun. There's connecting with others indoors. And Rob, thank you so much for your question. Well, let's move on to our next one. And we talked about, Craig, you're going to love this one. And that was, could you save money by shopping your house first? We looked at our tendency to, our default to just buy when a need arises, often forgetting the resources we already possess. This leads to extra spending and extra waste and clutter. We talked about the things in your pantry that you throw away. And I came up with a simple solution, but profound, and that is pause and intentionally shop your house first. Check your closets for clothes. Check your pantry for food. Check your storage for items. And ask yourself, can you use what you have already? Can you be creative in substitutions or just repair it instead of replace it? And this is deeply spiritual. It talks all about that valuing and utilizing all that God has already provided you, not just seeking the new stuff. And it really cultivates contentment, resourcefulness, creativity, and I like the word gratitude, pushing back against consumerism. And we got this question from Felicity from Arizona. And Felicity said this, if I can get it to work. Here we go. She says, "Hi, Ralph. I tried shopping my closet like you suggested, and I realized I have a lot," and she's put that in all caps, "a lot of clothes I don't wear, but I struggle to actually get rid of them. I feel guilty or think maybe someday. How does decluttering fit in with shopping your house first?" And Felicity, I'm going to say there, you hit the necessary flip side of shopping your house first. And that's dealing with, I'm going to use Craig's term, the crap that you already have. And they go hand in hand. And if your house is too cluttered, you can't even find or effectively use what you have on your own. So yes, decluttering, Felicity, is definitely part of good stewardship. Craig, do you have some ideas of how to deal with that clutter?
Uh, do I have some ideas? Yes. Do I ever execute those ideas? No.
Well, the
No,
best
I
laid
come by.
plans are, it's the best laid plans, right? That's what we always say, right?
I do have to say I come by clutter naturally. My mother was like that. No, I think I fall right into this category. So I constantly have to refine clothes, and not refine, refined. I have to go find clothes that I know I have, and so I've made myself go through the effort of trying to find those clothes before I buy a replacement. And I actually go beyond yelling, "Hey Tracy, have you seen X?" Um, but I think you do just have to. The spring cleaning is a worthwhile thing. Just once or twice a year, go through. Like I lost a bunch of weight. Um, First, I put on a bunch of weight when we moved to Louisiana, and then I lost a bunch. Well, I have suits. I used to wear a suit every day for 10 years. I wore a suit pretty much every day. I don't wear suits anymore. So a lot of those suits that were too big, they go. Somebody else can start wearing them now. And so I think you just have to be a little bit ruthless, and that, keep a few things for when you lose a little, the 5 pounds or whatever, but don't keep a lot. You just have to declutter and have to get rid of stuff. But it's hard. It really, especially if you're cheap. I mean, I'm my heritage has cheap deep in its soul, and so I just really struggle with this personally. So that's not a great answer, but I feel everybody out there who has the same. The struggle is real. The
Well, I
struggle is
think a
real.
lot of it can be that, aspirational clothing too. You think about, oh, you know what? I'm going to get thin enough to wear that again. I don't ever think I'm going to get fat enough to wear that again. But I always have that thought where I'm going to think. It's funny. My wife will say to me, because we have our first floor is our master bedroom. Then on the second floor, we got a couple guest bedrooms. And I had moved some clothes up there. And I was buying stuff online or something. My wife says, "You ever shop your closet upstairs?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Ralph, you got a whole closet of clothes upstairs." I said, "I don't wear that stuff." And she goes, "Exactly." So, of course, she got me, Craig. I went up there, I got a big old hefty bag. And I said, "You know what? Today's a day." And I was, what's the word you used? Ruthless. I ruthlessly went through that closet, man. And somebody at the Goodwill made out well that day. But that very act of, trying on, making outfits and doing all those things, it really helps you get into that excess, and you can see where those things are. And then you got to set clear rules for yourself. Be honest. Ask yourself tough questions. Have I worn this in the last year? does it fit? Is it ever going to fit? Is it damaged beyond reasonable repair? Do I actually feel good wearing it? And if the answer is no, it's likely time to let it go.
Well,
Yeah.
you can also step down. So clothes that you used to wear to work maybe aren't quite good enough to wear to work anymore, so you wear them when you go to the store. Or maybe they're not good enough to wear when you're going to the store, so now you wear them when you do yard work. So you really can kind of recycle down until you just don't need it anymore. That's what when I was back in my running days, that's what I would do with running shoes. I'm a big guy and they would break down. Well, once they didn't have enough support anymore, they were yard shoes or something else. And so I think you can, decluttering and getting rid of stuff is a good thing to do, but you can also think about kind of internally recycling some of these things.
And Craig, I'm picturing you now. You're going to laugh when I tell you this. I'm picturing you on the zero turn, right? With one of those suits on because the mosquitoes are bad. And I'm thinking, he's wearing it down at this point. He's got a pair of wingtips and a suit out there on the zero turn.
And the Green Acres theme playing in the background. So.
There you go. But let's talk about the guilt, because I think the guilt is something else she mentions here, and I think we need to address that. And I got to get that. Sometimes people do feel guilty about getting rid of something they spent money on. I think that's a common thing, but I think you have to reframe it. The money's already spent.
Yeah.
And keeping an unused item doesn't bring the money back. It just adds clutter and maybe ongoing guilt, because then you're looking at, I don't ever wear these things. It just continues to go. Now, the way you can shed that guilt is maybe if you donate it to somebody. There are organizations out there for people who are going, back into the workforce who need that suit or need that dress shirt that you can't fit in anymore. I think that can be the opposite side of that guilt. And you also, use that as a learning curve to your past decisions. It doesn't have to be your current failure. Don't always look at that. And that maybe someday trap, I think that's dangerous. Because if it hasn't happened in 1 or 2 years, guess what? It's probably not going to happen. Like, it cracks me up, Craig, how many people pay for these storage units. And I'm not bad-mouthing the storage people that make these, but they're building them everywhere. And I'm thinking, people are paying money month after month. And I sometimes say, I'd love to do, like, a Storage Wars kind of like this, right? I'd love to go into one of those storage units and just take an inventory of the actual value of the stuff that's stored in there and say, okay, well, you're paying $100 a month for this storage unit. The stuff you got stored in there is not worth $300. So in 3 months, you'd have been better off to give this stuff away.
Yep.
That's just my opinion.
No, and you raised a great point about the dress clothes. So a lot of our students, and it's not just us, they really struggle to buy dress clothes. I mean, they're expensive. And so if they can go to the thrift store and buy a nice dress shirt or, a pair of slacks or whatever, you're helping somebody out. And you're absolutely right. When the money's gone, it's gone. Hey, can I lay a little stoicism on you?
Let's hear it, man. You always give us your share of stoicism every week. I think the listeners look forward to this.
So good. Well, hopefully they do, because they're going to get it anyway. They have a practice called negative visualization, where you try to picture if something bad happens. And basically you're preparing for the bad event. And then if it doesn't come, you're still prepared. But if it does come, you're better prepared. I think we can do a little twist on that in the pre-clutter stage. If you're getting ready to buy something that's maybe aspirational, ask yourself how you're going to feel if you can't fit into that shirt or that suit or that pair of slacks. And maybe that'll be enough to make you say, you know what, there'll be a deal when I do lose that weight, and I'll go online or go to the store or whatever and buy it then. But I'm going to feel doubly guilty if I don't lose that weight and get into this pair of slacks or suit or whatever it is. I'm going to feel bad that I wasted the money, and I'm going to feel bad that I didn't lose the weight. Avoid that. Just don't buy it. Think that through a little bit. Don't buy it. And then you'll also have that much less clutter. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's a great idea. It's interesting. I think we studied something like that when I took the Dale Carnegie course, and it not quite the same as stoicism, but kind of prepare for the worst possible scenario and then work like hell to improve upon that. And I think it's kind of the same idea, but I think that's a brilliant way to look at it, because, and the truth is, with clothes, fashions change. It just does.
Yep.
Of course, my dad would always say, well, yeah, but what's old is new again, and it'll come back around. And I remember when I was in high school, I'd always gone to public school, Craig. And then I went to Catholic high school and I had to wear a suit and tie every day. And I never forget, my dad gave me these fat ties. I mean, these ties were like, I guess they're like the 70s ties, man. And like,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, cool. My dad gave me ties. Well, here I go walking into school. I got this tie that's like 6 inches wide on maybe, right? And I was the laughing stock of the place because everybody's like, at that point, the little thin ties were in, right? So it's like, you know what, Dad, yeah, great, thanks for doing that. But you know what? That I don't think that's coming back, dude.
Well, did he make you wear it with one of his old leisure suits?
Now, I never
Hopefully
had
not.
one of those, but he did give me a briefcase, and I learned what I didn't know what the word nerd meant till he said, somebody kid, oh, you're a nerd. Anyway. Well, let's move on to our final topic before we run out of time or we get banned for talking about crazy stuff, because we already talked about cocaine now and blow and all that stuff. But anyway, so our last topic of the week was, can you intentionally lower one utility bill this month? We discussed overcoming the feeling of helplessness about utility costs by taking focused, intentional action. And what I recommended here was instead of feeling overwhelmed by trying to save everywhere, my solution was target one. Just pick one utility bill and implement 2 or 3 specific, simple, free conservation habits for a month. I talked about turning off lights, shorter showers, adjusting the thermostat, unplugging those phantom chargers. That was a thing I didn't even know about, Craig, but that's actually a thing. There's actually phantom charging. And the faith connection here was really strong as well. Stewardship of God's creation, energy, water, and practicing discipline in our daily routines to avoid waste. It's about recognizing we can often make a difference through consistent small actions. And Kevin sent us this, and I knew this was coming. Kevin said this. He said, Ralph, you mentioned adjusting the thermostat as a way to save on electricity and heating. It's a constant battle in our house. My spouse likes it much cooler or warmer than I do. How do we save money here without freezing or sweating each other out? If I hadn't been down this road myself, I wouldn't have the answer. It's what I call the thermostat wars. All right, Craig, I'm not even going to comment on this. I'm going to let you go first.
Well, so fans are your friend, and extra clothing is also your friend. So we use a lot of fans. We bought these little rechargeable battery fans that you can just kind of put wherever you are. You know, if I come in and I've been out mowing or doing something in the barn, you know, just really overheated, you know, if I turn the thermostat down to 67, not only is my wife going to get frozen out, but we're wasting a lot of money. I can do a lot more good by just putting a fan on me. And you would be shocked by how much drinking a cold or warm liquid will do to help you out. You know, there's a reason that we drink a lot of really, really cold iced tea in the South in the summer. You have cold tea up there where you put a couple of ice cubes in it. Down here, it's you pack as much ice as you can and then put the tea on top.
I've seen that,
But
like the whole jug. Well, don't you make it out in the sun first so it's already boiling?
you
Right?
can.
Sun tea, right?
Yeah, it's a thing. But I think you can do some things like that. The other thing you can do that may help a lot with this is, are there rooms in your house where you can close the vents? You know, we have a guest room upstairs. We just close the vents. The only living thing that's up there most of the time is a cat, and the cat doesn't mind. This is our cat. We thought was a female that turned out to be a male, so he is named Loretta. But
That's
yeah,
interesting.
we didn't quite nail that one down. But you might be able to do some things like that. But fans are absolutely your friend. Putting on a sweater is huge. I mean, it sounds silly, but that can make a big difference.
No, it's so true. And I think a lot of ways you can actually look at the actual temperature difference, because there's also a perceived difference. You know, for me, 68 sounds a lot cooler than 70, but it's only 2 degrees. You know, and you can, and the other problem is a lot of people, and we have this right now in our bedroom. It's kind of crazy, Craig. I don't know what's going on, but like our bedroom is like a morgue. It's like 62. We got the house set at 70, but our bedroom is like 62. I've got to get a contractor out there to try to figure out, we need to do some balancing or something. But you know, but if you're going to be in a battle, you know, Kevin, I'm going to say this, you know, try to meet your spouse somewhere in the middle, dude, because the couch gets really uncomfortable. And, you know, if you can adjust it by 1 or 2 degrees and, you know, maybe you put on a sweater or vice versa, you know, those small adjustments can save a lot of energy. You know, I've seen some studies that even a 2-degree adjustment can save you quite a bit of money. And like I think you're great about the fans. I think that's a great idea. Somebody was at softball last summer. They had one of these fans that runs on batteries. You plug it in and it charges. Like that's pretty cool. Keeps the bugs away. And at the same time, I put in my notes here. If someone's always cold, buy them a sweater.
Yeah.
My daughter-in-law, you're gonna laugh at this one, Craig. I might have told this one on the show before, but I'll tell it again. But anyway, my son lives in Texas. He's in the Coast Guard, and my son is very frugal. We'll say it that way. And he didn't want to turn on the or he didn't want to turn on the heat. Excuse me. So we were down for Christmas. I think it was last Christmas or the Christmas before. I don't remember which. And she was sitting there shivering all the time. And I said, I'm gonna fix him. So I got on Amazon. I went and bought her electric blanket. So I said to her, I said, here we go. You got a blanket, but you can use a space heater, like you said, only in the room that you're currently cold in, or use some draft stoppers. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. This might cost you a little bit of money, but have a home energy audit done.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, because you can have a home energy audit done because you're just paying money for the stuff to go right underneath your doors or through your old windows. Like you mentioned, use ceiling fans, portable fans, because moving air cooler. And another thing that I found in my research is a lot of times it's not the temperature, it's actually the humidity in the house.
Well, that's right. And what the fans do is they actually evaporate the moisture on your skin. By the way, this is a constant battle in my household. Having a fan on when nobody's around to feel the air is a waste of time. It doesn't do anything. Sometimes you need to just circulate the air because the air's stale, but it's okay to turn the fan off when you're not in there.
I'm having thoughts of like, if a tree falls in the forest, anybody really hear it?
Yes, I was there. I heard. No, I didn't hear it.
But you know what? I love that idea because, one of the things that my cousin's an electrician and he did when we did some renovation to our house, the bathroom fans, he put timers on all of them. And I thought that was brilliant because I don't know how many times I've been over to somebody's house and you go in their bathroom and the fan's on, appreciate that. Thank you. But like, it'll run for a half a day. So he said, you know what, Ralph? He says, what I'm going to do on every room that you've got a fan, I'm going to put a timer on there. And I think that's what you're talking about, Craig. And I think that's really a great idea. But I think you got to communicate and compromise. I think those are all good things that you can do.
By the way, sorry, I'm texting my neighbor because they just offered to take the trash cans out. So,
well, that's important.
Yes, it is because we have a medical appointment this afternoon, and I'm not going to get to it till late. Yeah, I think you can compromise. The point about humidity is really right. You should get the home energy audit because a lot of utility companies will provide that for free or for a very low cost. So it's worth doing. There may be some ways that you can save a lot of money, but I want to throw one out that people don't think about enough, and that's water. Water is not the most expensive thing in the world unless you have a leaky pool like we did, but it can add up, and it's really bad from an environmental standpoint to waste water. It's arguably our most precious resource. And so if you can do some things, turn the faucet off when you're brushing your teeth. I'm not going to really ask anybody to do this, but just picture if you let the water run for 2 minutes with a pitcher underneath there, you better have a big pitcher or it's going to overflow. And a couple people doing that every day, at least every day, 365 days a year, that's a lot of water that's being wasted.
It sure is.
You just save a few bucks, but it's not bad to be resource wise, not just for the money, but for the environment. I feel like we needed to come back from the blow comment, so I'm trying to be a little more quickly.
You know what? I commend you on that. But it's so true because, and I mentioned that in that show, is like, I thought about myself. I sit there and brush my teeth because I got one of those toothbrushes that tells you to brush for 2 minutes. And I'm thinking, I'm going to turn the water off. That's a really good point.
Well, we lived in Arizona, where you are, where I am now, we don't worry that much about water, but they literally on the Hopi and Navajo reservation, they have big signs that say water is life. And that's true.
It's a really good point. Well, let me just try to wrap things up here. This past week was all about focusing on mindful consumption and resourcefulness, whether it was packing lunch, canceling those unused services, pausing before buying, finding free fun, or using what we already own. And then finally, like Craig said, conserving utilities. It all comes back to being intentional stewards of everything God has entrusted to us, our money, our time, our possessions, our health, and even natural resources. These actions fight against the cultural currents of convenience at any cost, passive consumption, and constant accumulation. They call us to be more disciplined, aware, creative, and ultimately more content in the way that we live our lives. It's not about deprivation. It's for our own sake. It's about aligning our daily practices with deeper values and goals, finding freedom from the stress of overspending and waste, and freeing up resources, financial and mental, to serve God and others more effectively. So as you head into next week, perhaps consider which of these 6 areas presents the biggest opportunity or maybe the biggest challenge for you right now. I'm going to turn that water off when I brush my teeth, Greg. You made a good point. You don't have
Right.
to master them all at once.
And Ralph, we're still friends despite your strange view on tomatoes.
I appreciate that. So pick
Thanks,
one of
Ralph.
these. Now, pick one of these to focus on. Maybe it's packing lunch 3 times a week. Maybe it's canceling one subscription today. Maybe it's planning one free family activity for next weekend. But small, consistent steps rooted in prayer and desire to honor God lead to lasting change. So thanks again for joining me on this extended recap. Craig, again, thank you so much for your insight, for your stoicism that really does help us along. And I truly hope that revisiting these topics and hearing listener perspective has been encouraging and helpful. And remember, this journey is about progress, not perfection. Extend grace to yourself and keep taking those faithful next steps. And we'll be back next week for our weekly show, and I'll be back tomorrow on the daily show. So if you need something you should borrow or buy, go and look at our next show. It's all about finding ways to do things better. And if you've got questions, send them to us. We'd be happy to answer them. Craig, again, thank you so much for joining us today. And everybody, I encourage you to have a great day today.